We start at the Breyer residence in rural BRIGHTBURN, Kansas, where an all-American couple are trying to conceive a baby. Unfortunately, no one has given either of them the sex talk, and they're probably having problems because they keep shagging with their clothes on, which I imagine would be a bit of a showstopper if the sperms can't get through their trousers.
Not a great plan.
Suddenly, though, a mysterious fiery object crash lands in the woods across the field. Then we cut to a montage of home videos, as it seems they've now been successful producing a baby, likely after the dad looked up how to have proper sex that results in a pregnancy on www.howtogetyourwifeuptheduff.com. Anyway, he seems to be a perfectly ordinary boy, so the filmmakers wisely think, screw this boring shit and let's cut to 10 years later already. So a decade later, and we meet 12-year-old Brandon, who's out here playing hide and seek with his mum Tori, because she still babies him like a rye mill. We also catch up with him at school and meet some supporting characters, like his super hot top totty teacher, who asks Brandon what the difference is between a wasp and a bee. And before you can say, one's arsehole explodes when it stings you and the other is a Marvel MILF, he shows off his super intelligence by going full bug nerd, and boring the class to death with his intimate knowledge of flying insects and shit. And apparently, bees are pollinators and wasps are predators. And one such species of wasp are a brood parasite, who lost the ability to make nests and so use brute force to make the other wasp species raise their young. For some shit. Naturally, the super cool black bully kid then makes fun of him as the whole class laughs. And the cute girl what he's always had a crush on says don't you listen to him bruv, cause smart guys totally make our panties wet too. I mean, just look at Bill Gates and that specky fella who was stuck in a chair for years gazing at stars and shagging his nurse. Anyway, later that night, Brandon starts spazzing out in his sleep whilst hearing alien words in his head, and his mum then notices something's up and finds Brandon out in the barn, who's trying to break open the cellar hatch which has been chained up for some reason. So she snaps him out of his sleepwalking and finds he has no memory of what happened, except something was calling to him from the barn. You know, if I didn't know any better, I'd say this was a straight up rip-off of the Superman origin story. I swear I saw all this 20 years ago in friggin' Smallville. The next morning, his dad Kyle was doing some DIY with his son, who confirms he's totally adopted, and before he can say, I can't believe you've lied to me for my entire fucking life, his dad just says, enough of this gay-ass chit-chat because you've got a lawn to mow, son. But the kid is so useless, he can't even turn the machine on, and pulls the string so hard that he sends the fucker flying 100 feet across the field, before hearing those foreign voices again, and so naturally, he sticks his bare hand in the lawnmower blade, which snaps off against his skin without a scratch. That evening, his parents celebrate his 12th birthday by going to a shitty diner with his aunt and uncle. And said uncle gives him a giant fuck-off gun, but his dad says he's still too much of a wet wipe to wield a shooter and says he can have it back when he's older. Brandon then has a total meltdown and demands he be given that weapon, which is almost as big as him, but his dad totally refuses and tells him he can't have any ice cream either because they're taking him home and shit. That night, his parents lament on how their once little boy is now getting older and changing into a right gobby prat, and decide to go camping this weekend so they can spend more time with him and ensure he doesn't do any bad things and go further off the rails. The next morning, Brandon falls into a trance whilst eating his breakfast and is so hungry he ends up chewing the fucking fork. And before he can say, someone needs to get some ivermectin down his neck because this kid's clearly got more worms than my dopey dog, his mum goes and finds his porn stash under his bed, which just consists of super lame lingerie pics. But shockingly, they just turn out to be covering up dark and twisted images of internal organs and shit.
Nice.
And instead of calling Childline or at least a fucking shrink, they just shrug and say maybe we should just have the talk with him. Which is weird, because when my dad had the talk with me, he simply described how my body would be changing and how I might start to find girls' booties quite attractive. But I don't remember him ever saying, maybe you should wank over nudie naked women instead of grotesque close-up shots of internal organs, son. So his dad takes him shooting, and indeed gives him the talk about how his body is changing and how he might start to get horny when walking past a pair of melons at a fruit market.
Bruh.
But not once mentioning the whole internal organ wank bank material thing. Anyway, that night, Caitlin, aka the cute girl Brandon has a crush on, hears something strange at her window and creepily sees that nerdy scrote from her class lurking behind her curtains. But before she can scream her lungs out, her mum bursts in and totally gaslights her by saying that she was probably just dreaming as there's no one there, and she should probably stop eating a whole pack of cheese strings before bed. The next day at school, Tori tells her sister merrily that her son is really changing, and is less like the sweet innocent boy she raised and more like a weirdo creep who keeps pictures of internal organs under his bed to jerk off to in the middle of the night. But hilariously, Mare reckons she's just overreacting, before Tori notices him drawing weird symbols in his notebook. And that night, Kyle catches Brandon staring at the chicken coop, whilst the local poultry folk spit feathers in panic, and are all riled up like someone's got to mention the name Colonel Sanders. Also later, Kyle is disturbed from sleep yet again in the middle of the night and discovers that some twat has killed all his chickens. Though Tori reckons it's just a wolf, bro. But Kyle doesn't think a wolf is quite capable of ripping off a padlock chain and murdering all his ground fowl without eating any of the meat. But she's in such denial that she can almost speak Egyptian, and he says it's more likely the work of that Brandon kid, because he was totally out here earlier staring at the things in a weird culty trance and shit. But she totally gaslights him and all and says you're losing your marbles, mate. The next day, Brandon is picked to participate in a trust exercise as part of his gym class, and is totally peeved when Lana Lang, Caitlin, totally lets him fall, because he creeps her out more than Matt Hancock practicing his listening skills. And the teacher makes her help him up before Brandon takes revenge by crushing her hand, and leaving her looking like that bloke from Scary Movie 2.
Help! Here. Oh, take my hand. Ah, come on. You're gonna fall unless you take my hand.
Naturally, Caitlin's mum Erica wants a little scrote arrested for maiming her daughter, as the head teacher soon suspends him whilst the sheriff tries to calm the situation. But Erica gives him evils as they leave, and he totally marks her card, son. That evening, Tori tells Kyle about that time she found him talking to the trapdoor in the barn and waffling on in a foreign language, whilst Kyle just panics and asks if he found it. And although they don't say what it is, she lays his fears by saying no, but he totally knows it's in there, bro. Naturally, Kyle starts to totally panic again, because it just dawns on him that Brandon has never bled a day in his life, and although he might walk and talk like them, he's not really like them at all. Cause he's yet to meet a functioning human being who goes around crushing little girls' hands.
Damn!
Meanwhile, Brandon is spazzing out and hearing those foreign voices again, and this time they're way more intense. Though he starts to be able to make sense of some of the words now, and apparently, Ishigaro means take. And before you can say, does it mean take your fucking psych pills? He's back at the barn again and desperate to get into the cellar, because it looks like a rave is going on under there, and he's suffering from FOMO and totally wants to get his groove on, bro. Suddenly though, the hatch is totally opened and the fucker is soon floating above it, whilst chanting in some culty foreign language where larum apparently means the. But before he can finish translating the phrase, Tori bursts in, which totally puts him right off his deciphering gig, and he falls into the hatch and scratches his hand on some metal thing. Turns out he's a space alien and they've kept his ship in the cellar all these years. And no wonder they hid it away, because this fella seems to have arrived in a giant friggin' anus. Anyway, he's also cut his hand, and now presumably feels rather vulnerable for the first time in his life, which probably doesn't bode well for anyone at this point. Anyway, now he's Superman confirmed, Tori feels a gender-flip Jonathan Kent role and tells him he was sent here for a reason and shit. Because they totally prayed for a baby despite spending years doing sex wrong. And then when one magically dropped out of the sky, they hilariously thought their prayers were literally answered. So they totally just stole this random infant what they found in the woods and pretended they got him off eBay and shit. But instead of being a mild-mannered Clark Kenty type who takes such momentous news in a calm and measured way, Brandon has a full-on meltdown and rages about being lied to his entire life. So he then runs out into the rain like a right emo bitch, and the last word in the phrase is now translated. And apparently, the alien word goal means world. So the voices are totally telling him to, quote, take the world, before his eyes light up red and he shoots blazing hot laser beams directly at the poor innocent cameraman. Anyway, now he's probably gone off the rails, he visits a 12-year-old prepubescent girl in her bedroom again. And he says he's going to sort her mum right out for giving him evils and chastising him for crushing her daughter's hand because reasons. Though I'm not sure why these two are his first targets anyway, because I thought the Black Buddy kid would have been his primary victim, given he keeps humiliating him in front of the class and mocking his knowledge of bugs and shit. But that kid totally disappears midway through this movie and is never mentioned again.
Okay.
Anyway, over at the diner, said mum Erica is closing up shop, having seemingly left her injured preteen daughter home alone where any old little boy with severe psychological problems and also superpowers can easily break in. And suddenly, things go all Blair Witch when strange symbols start to appear on the windows, as a ceiling light breaks in her eye and she's promptly terrorised by some weirdo in a gimp mask, before running for her life and locking herself in her fridge for some reason. But unfortunately, this weirdo gimp fella isn't like Victoria Beckham and totally ain't afraid of food storage facilities. And the door is soon ripped off as the masked gimp seems to be Brandon with deep red eyes.
Oh shit, not good.
The next morning, the sheriff and his partner are trying to work out what the fuck happened in the diner given Erica is now missing, before finding the super strange symbols on the cafe windows. Elsewhere, Brandon has a psych eval with his counsellor aunt, as apparently there's no one else in the district available at such short notice, so she has to do it, despite having a preposterously huge and potentially career-ending conflict of interest. Anyway, he says his main parents are okay, but are totally inferior to his birth parents, and soon goes full incel by saying he's a literal supremacist who is above normal humans. Naturally, she tries to pretend she didn't hear that, and instead asks if he feels bad about what happened to Caitlin after he crushed her hand and effectively made her an orphan. And he responds by saying sometimes when bad things happen, it's for a good reason, and thereby ringing more alarm bells than Hunter Biden asking to borrow your laptop for a bit. Anyway, she says she's got a report on if he's okay, or if he's indeed a walking red flag law. And she can't go easy on him just because she's the sister of the bird who found him in a random wood. But he just sits there, whilst we all try to figure out why this kid has suddenly gone evil out of nowhere, like a must-kill switch was flipped on in his brain. That evening, Kyle and his buddy shoot some pool, whilst the sozzled Uncle Noah is determined to drive himself home. Meanwhile, Brandon shows up at his aunt's house and totally threatens her to keep stum about his mental problems, and to make sure she don't talk to that chocolate sheriff bloke either. But she just tells him to sod off because you're totally a psycho, son. So naturally, he masks up and sets about trying to yeet her, but is soon disturbed by a drunk Uncle Noah, who's more gazebo than Paul Gascoigne in his 90s heyday, and totally catches him lurking in his closet like a right creepy weirdo. And he tells him it's too late at night to be exploring his feminine side and trying on his wife's bras and shit, so stop twatting about because I'm taking your butt home. So after telling a small boy to get into his van, steady, Noah says that he's totally going to tell his parents about him doing all these bad things, so naturally, Brandon smacks him up good and proper, and then chases his drunk uncle down an isolated road, before lobbing his car 30 feet in the air and giving him a rather nasty dislocated jaw for his troubles. Returning home topless to his panicking parents, he gives some BS excuse about how he got bullied after playing some soccer, so hence why he's nudie naked from the waist up and shit. After finding out that Uncle Noah is totally dead after getting drunk and trying to improve his jawline via DIY YouTube videos but failing miserably, Tori tells Brandon the bad news, where he's all like, lol, whatever bro, and more emotionless than Kevin Feige when you tell him that Marvel's best days are probably behind them. Though Tori tries to encourage him to get in touch with his emotions and totally have a good cry. But his dad has had enough of all this gay shit and confronts him about what he knows of the night of Noah's death, and Brandon just casually shrugs, which totally triggers his phony fakey dad before he yells into his face, and thereby triggering him into super shoving his father into a small wall. Kyle then finds that bloodied shirt he was hiding in his bedroom and just knows it's Noah's effluvia what's caked all over it. But Tori still refuses to believe that a sweet little boy what crushes little girls' hands and doesn't cry over family members' deaths could ever intentionally hurt people he barely even knows. So she then tries to blame him because he totally let his drunk friend drive home, before again gaslighting his guilt and defiantly stating that she will never ever turn against her son, what they totally just found in a random wood a few years back. After taking a day or two to calm down, Kyle says he's going to take his boy on a weekend trip where it's just the two of them. And before he can say, this'll end well, the local sheriff turns up, asking if she knows anything about all these strange symbols being left at murder scenes. Naturally, she lies to his face and tells him to sod off and go get a warrant if he wants to come into her gaff and, quote, look around, whilst Kyle indeed takes Brandon into the woods on another shooting trip. Tori then races up to Brandon's bedroom after remembering that time she saw him drawing similar things in his notebook at school, before finding said notebook and indeed realising that it was him who's been drawing these same symbols, and pretty much confirms that it was also him what's been doing all these bad things. Meanwhile, Kyle tells Brandon that he loves him, before proving his love by letting a slug loose into the back of his son's head, which does sweet FA except piss off the psycho super kid rather royally. And it was at that moment that he knew he fucked up. Because Kyle then hilariously tries to reload his shooter, even though the bullet to the head did fuck all the first time. And before he can say, Brandon masks up again and then melts his daddy's face off with his red hot laser beams. And because it isn't enough to commit one act of familicide in one evening, he goes back home to take out his poor milfy mum and all. So she phones the sheriff whilst cowering under the kitchen counter like a right cack, as her phony fakey super psycho son tears up the gaff all around her. Luckily, said local sheriff and his newbie partner soon arrive, but the former instantly gets yeeted into a pink dust before even crossing the threshold, leaving his random nameless partner alone to protect her, and presumably the town. Unfortunately, the rookie cop makes a rather rookie move and takes her eyes off the suspect to radio for backup, and so naturally, promptly ends up getting the Chris Brown treatment and smacked up into the fucking ceiling, son. Now on her own, Tori decides to get the heck out of Dodge by falling out of the bedroom window and almost killing herself in the process.
Okay.
And after cutting her hand in the fall, she suddenly remembers when her son cut his hand on that butthole ship when he fell into the barn cellar after suffering that mid-air epileptic fit a few days ago. Anyway, once down there, she finds the remains of that missing waitress who once demanded her son be arrested for crushing her daughter's hand and then giving him an evil stare and shit. And now she totally gets why there was an awful decomposition smell coming from the barn ever since she went missing. No! Quickly refocusing, she snaps off a chunk of alien metal and totally prepares to shank her phony fakey psycho kid. But she totally hesitates when he says he actually wanted to do good. And before you can say, was that before or after you murdered a waitress because she looked at you wrong and also broke off your uncle's jaw because he caught you lurking in his wife's closet? She finally goes to shank him, but he totally catches her before she can stab him, and so he takes her on a free flight up into the sky. And before she can say,
can you read my mind?
He drops her from the fucking moon. And it looks like it's curtains for this Elizabeth Banks looking denialist bird who couldn't accept the truth about a psychopathic son who doesn't cry at death and wanks over internal organs until it was far, far too late. Then he gazes at an approaching plane to ominous music. And we end on the wreckage of said plane having squashed their entire farmhouse flattened and Prince Elrond's face. As a news reporter soon explains that Brandon is the only survivor of a tragic accident, whilst he sits in the back of an ambulance and casually eating a cookie. And that's it. That's the movie. Though my favourite part was the super awesome mid-credit sequence, where my man Michael Rooker plays an Alex Jones-type conspiracy theorist and describes how other dark versions of the Justice League are now emerging across the world, including a half-fish man out capsizing boats in the South China Sea, and a weirdo witchy woman choking people out with ropes and cords, which sounds just like my ex-girlfriend, to be fair. But man, this flick was so educational. And I guess the moral of the film is never adopt infant space aliens that fall from the sky into a random forest. And always take your clothes off if you're trying to conceive a baby. Because remember folks, sperms have yet to evolve the ability to swim through Levi jeans, no matter how horny you are when you finally blow. But anyway, that's the plot and that's your lot. Considering that mail thing so you don't miss any future recaps. Tell me if you like this flick in the comments if you have time, and I'll see you in the next one.